Hey everybody, it's Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com here in San Diego, California. So today I have a Vespa ET4. What am I going to show you how to do on it? I'm going to show you how to completely detrim the scooter. Whether you're doing a complete paint job or maybe a restoration, these scooters now are over 15 years old. So there's plenty of reasons to need to take one all the way apart down to the bare frame. Or you just need to get access to a rear brake cable or replace the clock battery. This video is going to cover everything on how to detrim this scooter from start to finish, every part of it, starting from the front, moving on to the rear. And if you're looking for any parts for the scooter, you know where to go, ScooterWest.com. We carry tons and tons of aftermarket and original Vespa spares for the Vespa ET4 and ET2. With the modern Vespas, this is where it started. This is where it started with me and the whole shop, Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. We've all loved and been into vintage scooters forever, but right when this scooter started the new modern Vespa revolution, we were on board and the first ones to kind of get our hands on them back in 1996 is when I first got one of these things, the 50th anniversary for the Vespa. You can look at some of my past videos covering my own personal Vespa ET4, but let's get right into it. All right, let me quickly go over the basic tools needed to disassemble the scooter. You could do 90% of the job with just a number 2 standard Phillips driver. It's very useful to also have a shorty. Some of the fasteners are a little larger, so I have a power bit, or you can use a regular number 3 Phillips screwdriver. The number 2 will work in a pinch as well. In order to remove the mirrors, you're going to need a 17mm wrench and a 13mm socket. So a very useful tool for prying the bodywork off on any of these modern Vespas is tool trim, and it's all one word, tool trim. Just punch in our website, ScooterWest.com, very inexpensive, just add it to your order. Say you're ordering 98 bucks worth of stuff. Just add this to the order and then you'll be over the $100 mark and you'll get heavily discounted or free shipping on your order from ScooterWest.com. Some of the other tools that were useful, since we went pretty far into disassembly of the bodywork, I have a small flat blade screwdriver to disassemble the clock, to get to the clock battery. Had a 10mm socket to disassemble the rear fender. Had a little pick tool in order to dismantle the ignition lock if you need to pull the ignition lock out. And some just various pliers that sometimes can be helpful. So ET4 has got a unique set of mirrors. They're completely different between the left and right. So starting with the right one, we got a 17mm wrench. There's the nut right here, and there, this one's pretty tight. Go ahead and break the nut free. And much like all the other modern Vespas, pretty much the LX and later, you know, the next generation of this scooter, they work on this principle where it's got the threaded shaft as part of the mirror and this loose nut that actually locks down onto the mirror perch, or actually the brake master cylinder. So got that one off. That's your right hand side. I think I did say left. And the left hand side, you're gonna need a 13mm deep socket, and directly underneath where the lever is, you gotta feel your way around, and there's gonna be the nut, and you can access the fastener right underneath there. Hold the mirror and go ahead and free up the 8mm nut that retains the mirror. And I'll pull it out and show you what you got. So once you have those off, pretty straightforward. We don't really have these original painted mirrors. We do have a black reproduction replacement mirror. It looks just like the ET4 mirror. You could paint them if you're looking to restore it. Alternatively, we do sell a set of chrome mirrors for this scooter. And you can look on our website, ScooterWest.com. Under all the accessories, very popular option just to buy new mirrors for your scooter. So now the handlebars are pretty cleared up. This would be your next step if you were getting access inside this clock assembly, whether you're flushing the brake fluid, most likely replacing the clock battery, because that really pesters me that that clock's not working on this 1500 mile ET4. Replacing a headlight bulb, a speedometer cable, any of those kind of options, replacing the switches, you'd need to take it to this part. So take a pry tool right from, if you're sitting on the scooter, it would be your left-hand side, and just pry the badge right off. That tool works perfect for popping the badge off. Underneath there is a screw, a single screw. Have our power driver handy. We're gonna make it really quick. You can use hand tools. I recommend using hand tools if you're not familiar with power tools. And go ahead and get the single screw that holds the cover in place, shift the cover up, and pull it right away from the bodywork. So right underneath the center part of the headlight, remove the single screw. Don't touch the screw that's above it. It's a flat screw. That's for adjusting your headlight aim. And I've seen people just unscrew that out of the way and they throw the headlight all out of adjustment. Single screw in that little position. And just underneath the handlebars right here, and also on the right, another screw right here is the pair of screws that hold the handlebar covers on. And I can tell you somebody didn't have them in the right order. This one that has the smaller head's the one that goes centered right underneath the headlight. The two shorter ones are the outside corner screws. So kind of keep an eye on those. Once again, with your pry tools, the handlebars are pretty close. You want to get right under here and just give it a little pry. And it's nice if you have these kind of tools because you're not going to damage the plastic. And you see there's these two round reliefs that just pop right off. And one thing to keep in mind, now that these scooters are over 10 or 15 years old at this point, a lot of this plastic's pretty brittle. So keep that in mind. Be careful with everything in here. You got your headlight bulb. This is the basic one. It doesn't have the nice halogen bulb, but they remove the bulb socket. A lot of times you want to replace these bulb sockets because they're getting to be problematic. We have those available on our website if you need to replace that bulb socket. Just unscrews just slightly like a bayonet, and then you can pull the marker light right out. And that's the easiest way. I wouldn't bother with the electrical connections there. Now it separates the headlight assembly. Couple screws if you were going to replace a headlight assembly, and there's also a couple tabs that are buried in there if you were going to replace this headlight trim right here. It is possible to pry this off, but I would recommend taking this all apart and using a pry tool and popping the 4 fasteners from the inside. So underneath your handlebar cover, obviously you see a speedometer assembly. You have a rear brake cable. You have your speedometer cable that's threaded. A lot of times you gotta get little pliers on that and you can break that free if you need to replace it. You got your hydraulic front brake master cylinder. Levers, of course, if you drop the scooter, you may need to replace a lever. You got a single pivot screw. Covered how to change levers many times in my past videos. Your brake light switches, which is a common part to go out, and then all your control switches, which is the next step. Will pull the back half of the handlebar cover off. So right in the center, you can't really see what I'm doing. It's kind of a dark hole. Take your Phillips driver and remove the single screw in there. Ideally, you want to have a magnetic tip. Right now I just kind of like lost the screw, but I can still feel it back there. Not the most ideal solution. Another technique is to put grease on the tip of the screwdriver. So you have a pair of screws at each one of these bosses. Take extra care removing them. They're threaded right into plastic. And if you notice these screws, they're different than all the other screws. You got a longer one that goes in the left and right position. You got a shorter one that goes in the center. They have this really coarse thread, so I recommend using the original screws to hold this rear handlebar cover. And you can just go right behind the brake hose and remove the single screw here. So the speedometer cable's got to get disconnected. So I have to take a pliers and give this a little twist. That knurled nut that holds the speedometer mechanical cable to the bottom of the speedometer assembly. And it just pulls right away. You could pull this out and re-grease it. It would pull out like an inner cable and put a thin coat of grease. But I'll tell you, oftentimes if the grease is gone bad, you just need to replace the whole cable. And they're fairly inexpensive as well. So at this point, all that's holding the back half of the speedometer is all this wiring. And I'll warn you, they're pretty fragile, some of the wiring on these, now that these scooters are pretty old. So go ahead and disconnect the switches. Got your kill switch, it's a three position connector with 2 pins on it. Got your start button, and these wires just pull right out. These are the easy connectors here. And then moving on to the left side, you got your high beam, low beam connectors, or red connectors. So make sure you get these in the right order. The white connector is your turn signal switch, and this small connector on the bottom is your horn. And I've had a lot of people ask me, like, what's this extra connector I found? It's not connected to anything. It's got a pink and a white with a blue. That was for audible, like, clicker. So whenever you had the turn signals on, it would make a beep or a click. That's what that's for. Normally it's not connected or used on the Vespa. Now we're on to the tricky connectors. This is a printed circuit board, a flex circuit that's found on speedometers. This original speedometer in miles is impossible to find. One in kilometers is very difficult to find. So I highly recommend taking your time in not damaging your speedometer. Oftentimes if the scooter's been close to the coast, this may be already trashed, and some of your indicators won't work because the corrosion has attacked the circuitry on the in there. So you get your finger in there, you push this little tab right here, and it releases the connector. So once you release the connector, you want to carefully keep on wiggling the connector until it pulls away. Because what it wants to do is pull this flex circuit away from the whole speedometer, and it typically will ruin that speedometer. And then this one's got a little tab right where my thumb is. And again, you can see that the circuit's kind of lifting. Just take your time, rock those back and forth until they disconnect. And then this one's the most problematic one right here. It's a 2-pin connector for the immobilizer light. Not the most critical one, but it oftentimes you have a perfect example. See how it pulled the whole entire printed circuit board away from the speedometer. This is a very dangerous situation because oftentimes you would tear the speedometer printed circuit board, and then you would be just ruined. So I'm just going to carefully pull the printed circuit board out of the connector. So now we have separated the speedometer from the handlebar wiring here. So once this little printed circuit board pops out, you could push it back into place. This may have some of the self-adhesive material still on it. If any of these little bulbs are out, they all twist out and they pull right off. And they're different colors because they're different wattages. You know, we do have those little teeny bulbs available. They frequently last quite a long time. I've seen really high miles ET4s and they're still good. Shortly, the next step, I'm going to show you how to replace this clock battery, which is located underneath this well. If you see, the clock no longer works. So we'll go on to a little intermission from disassembling the bodywork and deal with this little clock battery thing. So you got to take some type of pliers and remove this kind of vinyl cap. Pulls right out. It's like a little weather protection cap. So you take a flat blade screwdriver and you turn this just 1/8 of a turn, and that separates the plastic cover for the clock battery, and located underneath that is a metal retainer for the battery. Sometimes you can put your finger in there and just flip it over, and there's the little metal thing that comes out. And in there is your clock battery, and sometimes just tip it up. You see there's corrosion on a clock battery. That corrosion may have already damaged the battery holder. So if that's the case, you can wipe the connections with your screwdriver. If the clock still doesn't work after you put a new battery, I would just recommend putting a brand new clock in there. It still is available, and we have brand new clock batteries available, and it's 494-521-BAT is the clock battery part number that we have. So if you have the clock battery dropped in with the positive up, go ahead and push it into the well. And here's the moment. Does the clock still work? Yes, it does. So we'll keep on moving on. We don't know if the buttons work. Usually the buttons work if the clock, whatever you want to call it, illuminates. And drop that little tin right in, whatever the little battery plate. And gotta make sure that little tin's right over the top of the battery. And then you drop the little plastic cover in, make sure it lands in the right spot. So make sure that cover's in, just turn it 1/8 of a turn. Clock is still working. We could put the little plastic cover in there and set the clock. And look at my luck. The clock does not work. Oh well. Could replace the whole clock. You got to disassemble this whole entire speedometer. It is possible to change out, but quite a bit of work. So next I'm going to cover how to remove this whole entire glove box assembly. A lot of times I show people that they've owned a Vespa for several years, and I go over to their scooter, and if you have the key to it, which is pretty important, you push it in the 12 o'clock position. When it's at the 12 o'clock, you can open the glove box door. And they're like, whoa, that's interesting. It does have 2 access spots for the bulbs, for your turn signals. But typically you'd remove the glove box if you had to change the brake cable, speedometer cable, or I highly recommend pulling the glove box if you're gonna drop the fork. Got to remove the floorboard. And likely if you lost the keys, you're gonna need to do all these steps here as well. Get access to the CDI box that has the immobilizer that reads the chip of the keys. If this is locked, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but you're going to have to drill those locks out, and that's not a very fun task if you've never tackled that before. So under here, these 2, I like to call them knee pads. I don't know why I've always called them that, but you got a single small Phillips screw that's located right underneath each side. Number 2 Phillips driver will take this off, and obviously the stubby's kind of going to be your best friend for taking this out. And each one of these covers is retained by that single screw. Then you lift the cover right off. And if you're wondering what goes in right here, they did have a can of Fix-A-Flat originally that you could buy for these scooters that would fit right in that little well, and there's a little holder for it. And then on left side, pretty much the same thing. As what you have access to is a pair of fuses underneath this panel. So if you're wondering why your running lights aren't working or something, I think there's a running lights and a turn signal circuit, if I recall. They're protected by this little fuse holder right here. You can use one of these pry tools and depress this little plastic tab right there, and the fuse holder will separate. So as with the fuse positions, the functions of fuses, you got this one on the side is your running light and tail light and all the little marker lights inside the dash on the right. And if I recall, this one's your headlight, the headlight circuit, or the turn signal circuit on the left. So moving on to the front of the scooter, there's a pair of screws. So I'd recommend having a number 3 size Phillips driver, so the next larger size. And these are a shoulder bolt. See, they got that little step on it. They're all going to be the same. So now we can easily remove the whole glove box assembly on the ET4 or ET2. Just pretty much pull it away from the bodywork. And what I like to do is lift this little tab right here. Just put your finger right there, and then drop the glove box down, and that releases the latch mechanism from the lock assembly. And this little guy will feed right through that little slot. And now we have the glove box all separated. And I'll show you what's on the back side of the glove box if you wanted to replace any of these components. So you have the latch assembly, which is activated by the pushing in your ignition key there. You can replace this unit along with a little spring. And the hinges are very simple for the door. Sometimes these are loose. It's just a pair of metal plates that retains the hinges for your glove box door. So I'll quickly go over some of the items that you would commonly access underneath this glove box assembly. You have the immobilizer antenna ring that goes around a key. This is what detects the immobilizer key. You can separate the lock assembly as long as the key is unlocked and in the 12 o'clock position. And you just push it in a little bit. You see the slot right here. There's a clip. And you need to have a pick and carefully pry this clip up. And it's a rather difficult task to do. This is not the best pick to do it with, but you want to lift this clip. Don't take the clip all the way out because it's not exactly easy to put back in. So you lift the clip about that high and then the lock assembly pulls away. And this is a tumbler. It actually presses out of this lock housing. Oftentimes as a scooter's theft recovery, all this stuff would be damaged, so you'd have quite a bit of work to do. Once you get the lock all in there, it's all greased, go ahead and put this back in. Index everything, make sure it's at the keys to the lock, the 12 o'clock lock position, and then you could carefully push this clip all the way home. So believe me, it actually went pretty easy for me. If you're doing this for the first time, it's not exactly the easiest thing. Make sure the lock doesn't pull off and the antenna needs to be snapped back onto the outside of your ignition immobilizer. That's your detects the immobilizer key. And then we'll make sure the key still functions, no problems there. This is your CDI box, or that also includes the immobilizer. Underneath this rubber boot is a pair of connectors. One for all the electrical connections for the immobilizer system, and one for the antenna. You just push the little tab on the connector and then pull them straight out. And it's obviously easier if you have the box out. It's just retained by two bolts that use an 8mm socket. And then put the boot back in place to keep the moisture out of that system. You got the pair of bulbs for your turn signals. Again, they're just bayonet style. Just turn them and then they click right in place. You replace those little 10-watt bulbs in there. Further up front, there's this aluminum thing that has fins on it. That's your voltage regulator, located right here. And behind this relay, if you remove this relay, you can remove the ignition key switch. And oftentimes, now that these scooters are pretty old, the corrosion has gotten to the ignition switch. So you can remove the ignition switch. I'm lifting this little tab. I don't know if the camera got that. Looks like we got in there. And then you could pop the ignition switch right in without this bulb getting in the way. And you gotta make sure it keys snaps in place. Very important that snaps in place. One of the harder tasks to do on a modern Vespa of any sort is replace the front fender. In order to do that, you need to remove this pinch bolt right here. I'm not going to do that on this scooter because it's going to add another hour to this video. So remove this bolt, pull the handlebars off, much like a bicycle, and you could see the bearings located right here. A special tool to remove the upper lock nut and then remove the lower lock nut. You're going to drain your hydraulic brake system. Cut all the zip ties that retain both this hydraulic brake hose and your speedometer cable. Disconnect this. I recommend having the 927 crush washers, this is part number for the crush washers, on hand. And once you disconnect all that and support the whole scooter, you'll be able to pull the whole entire steering column out of the scooter. And then you're able to change out the fender. Not an easy task to do unless you have a full workshop with a lift and everything. If you're doing it at home, on the ground, not the most exciting job. You're probably best off putting the scooter on its side to pull the fork out. So with the body work on these scooters, it's all layered and internested with each other and all that. We'll move further towards the back. You're gonna need to remove these left and right side skirts, which I highly recommend removing if you're doing regular service, like servicing the belt. This just makes it really easy. It's only a single screw that retains both the left and right skirt. And you remove the screw and then just pull these right out. And this is a nice soft plastic, even considering the age. So it has a lot of flex. It's got these 3 pins that go into these rubber peg holes. And it's the same on both the left and right side. Nice, simple design. So both the left and the right side have a finish clip that pretty much terminates this silver trim into the floorboard, just retained by a single screw. And whether you're going to change the trim or pull the floorboard, you're going to need to remove these finished trim clips. And oftentimes if the scooter goes down, these trim clips are damaged, very inexpensive part. Next, we'll go ahead and remove this access cap for the spark plug door, as they call it, even though you don't access the spark plug on a liter motor ET4. It's got a single screw right here, little Phillips screw. Going to pull the little door. Underneath here, you have access to your ignition coil. If you need to replace your ignition coil, there's where you gain access to that item. And go ahead and pull up both the left and right floor mats, or you can just partly pull up the floor mat, and it reveals another pair of fasteners, both the left and right side. And again, they're just these larger Phillips screws that have 6mm threads, and they have a step, much like what held the glove box in place. So next, you can lift the floorboard and just lift it up and move it towards the front of the scooter. And sometimes this is where you find magical surprises. And guess what? I do see a magical surprise with this scooter. There's always magical surprises. You got an acorn, which means there's a rodent that was probably in the scooter. Another acorn. Extra, I call these bonus screws. That's when they're manufacturing the scooter, they like lose a screw or two in the process. Another bonus screw, cut of a zip tie, a clip. I didn't see any missing clips, but that may be also other technicians that worked on the scooter that have lost hardware down the frame, in the abyss of the frame. So why would you need to take the floorboard off other than if you're refinishing or painting the part? If you're going to change either your throttle cable, the rear brake cable, which is this thicker one, the wiring harness is accessible under here. Not much to do with this. But those are the only reasons you really need to take it apart to the point where you'd have the floorboard off. And I just did notice the throttle cable wasn't quite routed perfectly. So I'm going to route it back in this channel because it was kind of routed right across it. So now I have this in the correct positions right there. All right, so we'll remove the rest of the parts on the scooter frame. Lift your seat. Pretty straightforward to pull the underseat bucket right out. No problems there. If you are going to change out the seat, it's a pair of screws at the front of this little air intake scoop. And sometimes it's easier if you just remove the air intake scoop, which is actually retained by these two fasteners. If I was painting the scooter, I'd get this out of the way because you can have a more professional paint job if you remove this little boot. And there's a rubber boot that ties into your air box as such, and it will fish out of this cavity right here. And I'll show you what that connects to your air box boot. It's a pretty unique feature that they have this on ET4. The later ones, they just eliminate it. It's almost like an air snorkel. You could probably, you could be going through water that's up to the glove box and the motor probably will still keep on running. Support the seat as you're taking these fasteners out. Last thing you need is the seat to fall while you're pulling the two fasteners out. And now your seat lifts away from the scooter. And I did show you how to remove the lock tumbler from the ignition. The way you remove the one for the seat, if you can gain access to the seat, is lift this little clip right here, and with the key, go ahead and pull your tumbler right out. And once you have a new tumbler, you're able to just snap it back in place and make sure it doesn't pull out. So to remove this little finish cap that's underneath that covers the battery and the fuel tank, go ahead remove the fuel cap. You got the screw that holds the battery cover. And you have various screws, a larger screw in the middle, another long screw, and sometimes these are shorter screws, but sometimes they're longer screws. I've seen both. You can actually use a shorter screw right there, but they're all the same length. That's fine. Works just as well. Sometimes this thing can be damaged if you jammed open the seat. Pretty common part. One thing that hasn't been reconnected is this is your fuse holder right here. You got the main fuse, which is your 15 amp fuse towards the front. And this rear fuse, actually, this is your headlight fuse. The one towards the rear is your headlight fuse. That fuse on the inside up front was for your turn signals and brake light, if I recall. Got battery terminals, got some junky battery in there. You got your starter relay. And I recommend putting the fuel cap on so you don't have the fumes coming out. I'm not going to remove the fuel tank. In order to remove the fuel tank, you want to pull the battery out. There's a fastener underneath this tray right here. There's a fastener up on the right. And when we remove the tail light, there's one more fastener. And at that point, you'll be able to pull the fuel tank out on this scooter. So if you have the accessory top case on your ET4, you open it up, and you're gonna have a single wing fastener. That was already pretty loose. Go and pull that out. It's got a thick washer on it. And then go ahead and just slide the whole top case right off the rear rack. And there's another spacer underneath. So in order to remove the whole taillight assembly, you start by removing the two fasteners that hold the lens. And you definitely don't want to use a power driver to reinstall these screws in the lens, because if you over tighten these screws, it just ends up cracking the lens. You have access to your standard 1157 style bulb. If you want to remove the whole assembly, there's a pair of machine screws. They're just standard, I think they're 4mm screws or 3mm screws that hold this taillight assembly to the frame of the scooter. So remove those two fasteners, and at this point you can just pull the whole assembly right away. And there's that magical last fastener for your fuel tank. To disconnect these connectors, just pull them away. So remove the rear turn signals. Got a single screw, and the signal just lifts right away, and you're able to pull the bulb out, little 10-watt bulb in there, and that's just retained by that single screw and a little clip right here as well. So in order to remove this rear fender, there's a single bulb inside this assembly that's actually kind of coming loose. I'm going to see what's going on with that, so we'll go ahead and take this whole assembly off. It's a pair of short Phillips screws on both the left and right side. Let's see if I can. So left and the right, get those two screws out, and that's, you got more than this, because underneath here is a pair of fasteners. And there's also the bulb socket. You just pull straight out. That's your license plate bulb. There's a pair of 10mm fasteners that you'll need to get a small ratchet in there to loosen up. So in order to get those two pesky nuts off, I recommend having a really small ratchet, and you'll be able to get back there, and there's just barely enough clearance to get a really small flexible ratchet back there to loosen these two fasteners. So at this point, you remove the rear rack, and you pretty much have a body that you can just mask the engine and some of the other components and repaint the whole entire body. And oftentimes I do have a pair of washers that also retains the thing. Let's see what's going on here. It looks like I might just have a loose screw. Maybe not. I think it, you know what? I think it's just held by this one screw. It's also the license frame that's It's holding this on, and you can see one of the pegs is broken right there. So this chrome part is 582368, and it's a US specific part because it's got the built-in reflector in there. Pretty difficult to find, but typically we have these in stock. We import them. It's not a part that's sold by Piaggio USA these days. And if you do replace it, you're going to have to separate the lens out. We currently don't have any. Right now it's like July 2020. But I do have a painted silver, just standard European style one. So I'll put that on there. It's just better than that busted one that's going to fall off eventually. So you can snap the lens right in. And of course it's silver, but that fits in there perfectly. It's better than a broken chrome one. Plus it's a European part, so it looks better. Put the pair of fasteners in there. So to remove the rack, there's going to be this empty hole that's part of that plastic surround. And then you have the one Phillips fastener, and it's got a wave washer as well. Make sure the rack doesn't fall. I did loosen one of those Allen fasteners and then loosen the other one. And then the rack just separates from the frame. One thing that's cool about these ET4s is a cast aluminum rack. Pretty robust and rugged. Always kind of like that. So I pretty much have all the bodywork pieces off this scooter. So you wonder how many painted body parts are there on a Vespa ET4? Well, the number's 14. So you can count the Glovebox assembly, the Glovebox door, even the pair of mirror heads, a front and rear handlebar cover. You got the rear fender with the license light. That's if you have the chrome one, you're actually 13 painted parts, but oftentimes if you replace it with another one, you might paint it. So 14 pieces, and 13 of them being plastic, and the number one piece being the monocoque chassis of the scooter. That's all steel. You do just body work like you do traditionally on a automobile. And ideally, you'd maybe, if you were doing body work here, you'd want to drop that fuel tank. You can see it does have this dinger right here. I can kind of feel it right there. I'd probably work that dent out from the inside before I paint it. But we're not repainting this bike. It looks rather nice considering the age of the scooter. So I'll put it all back together and I'll go through it quickly. Pretty much just all the reverse steps of disassembly. So congratulations for making it to the end of my very long video that shows how to remove everything from your ET4 pretty much, short of pulling the engine out and the fork out. But kind of shows you how to access everything that's on the scooter with removal of the bodywork. If you like this video, helps us out, give us a thumbs up on the YouTube. If you haven't yet, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell. Have hundreds of other Vespa related videos, mostly about modern Vespas. And don't be afraid to watch like a GTS video, even though you own an ET4. There's a lot of tips I have in those videos, that kind of stuff that carries over. One thing that's beautiful about these modern Vespas, just like the vintage Vespas, is the parts are very universal between them. Like the fork comes out exactly the same on all the modern Vespas. And it's actually very, very similar to how the vintage Vespas come out. The fork pulls out, for instance, or a tire. If you change a tire on a GTS, if you know how to change a tire on a GTS, well, it's less steps to do it on this scooter. Help support us. We don't monetize our videos. Buy products from us on scooterwest.com. If you're in San Diego, support our local dealership, Vespa Motorsport. If you're in another city, support the local dealership there. It's always important to have a local dealership to go to. Whether you're looking to buy a brand new scooter or you're just looking for local parts supports, say you just need a tire in a pinch and have a blowout, you need somewhere to go in your own city. And that's very useful. Of course, my videos are there to help people that don't have close dealer support, or maybe I'm helping somebody that's looking to work for a dealership or an independent scooter shop. This is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and scooterwest.com. Till next time.